Okay, I'll try to speed this thing up. Yesterday, Ninka gave a presentation regarding the beginning of our fuel inventory here in the Netherlands, and how we're kind of working off a blank slate in some ways on that. So this is what the study is we decided to do. As she highlighted, we have a lot, Netherlands is dealing with the warmer and drier conditions. Some of the areas are very high risk for wildfires. Netherlands has a very high population density, as many of you know, and like a large number of the countries in the Northwest Europe, they have a very little historical context with wildfire, either as a wildfire component or as a management tool. What we wanted to do is build on an assumption that was brought to my attention when I first started working with some of my colleagues in the Netherlands, is that the public didn't know anything at all about fire. And that can be a dangerous assumption if it's, and try to tease that out. So we wanted to take a look at what did people think about wildfire, and then it made me think about possible ramifications here for this meeting on prescribed fire. And so we targeted one of the main areas in the country that has a lot of recreational activities, heavily forested, has a lot of heather, grasslands, beautiful country and part of the country. And that area has the most wildfires that do occur. A lot of people visit it during the year, and it has a wonderful national park in the middle that was mentioned yesterday. And put it in context of size, if you're familiar with the United States, the equal area of that 322 hectares in relation to the country would be like the entire state of Kentucky burning if you got rid of Alaska and Hawaii. So it was a much larger scale fire, and I use that as a context to understand what their version of a big fire is. And there's the country, so you guys know where that is. So what we did is that we went over in summer of 2014 and met with some agency people there and started laying out a survey instrument. And then we, like most survey instruments, they're done well. We did it, do it again, do it 3 times. We did it 24 times, probably because of the language dynamic that we're dealing with. We translated it into Dutch and then back translated it from the Dutch to make sure that the questions didn't look like they were written in Texas. And the survey had 24 basic questions, and they dealt with the demographics, the relationship of the individuals there, with Valua and nature. What did they think about wildfire, their awareness and perceptions of it? How did they feel they were personally prepared for this? And what were their expectations of government? Because that country is a high respect for the decisions of the government, so they wanted to see what, we wanted to explore that a little bit. We decided to narrow it down because we weren't going to be able to sample all those millions of people that come every year. 3 type of locations, 3 stakeholder groups. One would be the campground areas, a lot of campgrounds in the area, private. 2 attraction parks in one effort to try to capture some of that younger generation that was brought up in an earlier question, and 2 local villages that are embedded within this heavily wooded area. Locations are there. We have the 2 recreation areas up near the top there outside of Apeldoorn, 2 campgrounds down there, and then you had 2 villages. So got a nice geographic spread within this region. Just to give you some imagery here, some interesting challenges. You can see in the upper left the campground embedded there with a lot of forested area. And you got this nice pretty campground picture below that with the trees right up to their campsite. That's a lower right is a picture of a campground that with some permanent residents, so their perspective would be a little bit different than you might see if you had people that were just coming in for a week. And then we had a classic example, I think, of one of the challenges of a Dutch urban interface issue. On the upper right, that is grass growing on top of the roof. At least it wasn't thatch, which gives me nightmares every time I think about a wildfire going through that area. The amusement parks were again buried, and we did that specifically to try to capture that, again, that younger generation that we're doing that. And they're both on the suburbs of Apeldoorn and very much in a wooded area. And there's some of the villages. Safe space is obviously a concept they haven't quite gotten yet in some of these areas, but you can see that the wood grows, the forested area is right up near the top, and there is some thatch roof there on the upper left. We wanted to take a look and see where our samples are, so I'm getting into some results here. We got a pretty good percentages in different area where we got them, and there's some reasons why we didn't get into equal distribution of where the surveys were done, and I don't have time to cover that. But we did have a pretty good balance between the campgrounds and the villages is one way, but obviously because you have a more concentrated population in those amusement parks, we were able to capture a lot of those. Although I was a little surprised that we were able to get such a high response because that's not why they were there. And they often had little children, and the little children didn't want to wait for mom and dad to fill out the survey, but we still had a very high response. Response rate was approximately 80%. We determined that if for people who just said no, and so we were fairly pleased with that. We did quantify if they decided not to participate in the survey, did they fit into their age group in some way, young, middle, older, and of course where I'm getting that older is relative to something else now. And gender was also noted. We had only 130 people decline to participate at all. And most of those were older adults, and nearly 2/3 of those were women. We ended up getting over 500 surveys, and we were ecstatic that we got that. We did use 5 different distributors, including a couple Dutch citizens to help us, but it was always presented at the request of the agency as this is being done by Americans to try to determine what the Dutch feel about this. They thought it was more efficient to do that than say we're trying to get it because they might feel that somebody's trying to get into their business, I guess. It was kind of an interesting attempt, but it did work out very well for us. We did have to throw out 15 surveys because at least a quarter of it was incomplete, and we figured we wouldn't be able to get all the answers and balance the responses in that way. Then we used normal, there's some statistics for you, but we did use SPSS to analyze the stuff and try to figure out where there were some significant differences. We got people from 10 different countries. Most of them obviously were from the Netherlands. We were actually, the assumption we had was that we'd see more other European countries in there. We did pick up one American who probably didn't know what was going on. Approximately 1/3 of them did reside in that region. 2/3 were on a holiday or a day trip on there, and so we got about 50-50 split between people who self-identified whether they were living in an urban area or a rural upbringing, which is kind of an interesting concept. I still haven't figured out what that means in a country that's basically 90-some% interface, what a rural versus an urban area is in that country. I'm still working with that. Pretty good balance between female and male respondents. And we did have a wide range of ages from 18 to 89. And we were able to break those into some fairly clear quartiles to break down that age distribution on the responses. We wanted to know what they did, and so we were through this, and this is one of the areas that we had to really go back and forth on creation of this survey. And you know, not surprising, you know, we see some of the numbers, very few people jog, run, or walk. We were expecting a lot more people that would bike or claim would be mountain biking on recreational activities. That wasn't true. A lot of them considered camping as one of the big things as kind of a thing. I'm not going to do that. I don't know why we put flying kites and horseback riding into the survey, but we put it in there, and obviously it proved out to be something not very useful to say what they're going to do. One of the interesting things I really wanted to get to this survey is how aware they were of wildfires. And what was interesting on that is we broke it down. I've heard of wildfire occurring in another country. I have no experience. I've seen a wildfire person. A close friend or family member has seen a wildfire. And we were very pleased that a large component of it had heard of a wildfire occurring in the Netherlands, and a lot of that had to be probably because of the Easter fire the year before, because that fire was threatening the private holdings of Van Gogh paintings in the world, and so that got news attention fairly high on that. A lot of them did hear about a wildfire occurring in another country. A large number have no personal experience with wildfires, and then the numbers go down, as you can see. Now, this is where, kind of similar, and I've been finding it interesting all morning, is that in some ways we've all asked the same questions, but slightly differently. And so it shows a lot of us are working off the same basic platform of trying to figure out what the people are thinking. And it's not serious to 7% of the plants and animals, which really surprised me. But I think that's an important take-home lesson on, for when they talk about prescribed burning. And that was one of the hooks that I thought was pretty good. It's not serious to, you see those last four, that's what's really interesting. As it gets closer and closer to the personal level, they became more and more thinking it's a serious threat to them, which is fairly common in most of the survey instruments. But it shows you that there's sometimes a little bit of a disconnect between it's serious to me, but not to the person who lives next door. It's the same event. So there is that personalization of wildfire that could be very useful. And the idea of trying to reach out to the stakeholders there on the private side to encourage, for example, and also a challenge dealing with prescribed burning, if they think that it's really dangerous to me, but not necessarily to people living in the Netherlands. So as long as they're doing a prescribed burning someplace else, I'm okay with it. There's something we're going to have to build on that over the next few years. This country is experiencing an increase of wildfires every year. The average number seems to be about 4% a year increase on it. So we rate the likelihood of a wildfire will break out within the next 2 years. You can see the numbers there. Pretty comfortable in that middle range of likely, very likely. You have to throw in the surveys, the uncertain, don't know kind of category. And so that was a fair amount that made me a little, I mean, you think you would say, I have an opinion, but it was nice to see that they didn't have one and were willing to admit it. Coming from America right now, that's a refreshing point of view. Level of agreement here, which is kind of an interesting dynamic on this graph. Do you agree with it? And as the numbers work down, all fires should be put out as soon as possible. Humans start most of the fire, which is accurate. Now we start getting into some more of the management implications. Cutting down the thing, vegetative is safer than leaving them to nature. Fire risks are increasing. Fires kill a majority. You start seeing some issues there that have to be fleshed out a little bit more as we can move forward. Here what's really interesting is, to me, how well are you prepared? You go from all the way to not a whole lot of support to I know how to evacuate during a wildfire, to the other end it's the government's responsibility to inform me when a wildfire starts. So you've got a very wide span there of expectations that hopefully will let the agencies there tease out some of the things that they want to do, maybe target parts of populations, advertisement, some of the things that were brought up earlier on the education. How do we get this? Well, now we got some information to say this is the perception of the public. They think it's going to, 89 individuals thought it was going to be likely to rate occur in the next 2 years, very likely. People who spend more time out of doors is more likely to rate a fire as a wildfire as a serious threat. So the more connection they have with nature themselves, the more likely they see that serious threats of themselves or the family because they're out there versus someone who's not going out. The first bullet here reminded me of a result I saw from a presentation a few years ago from someone from Australia, and it's almost exactly the same numbers. I don't know what it's like in New Zealand, but this is a possible show, an educational outlet that we need to target. Either that or the men just feel that they know what to do. Either one is possible, I suspect. But it is kind of an interesting thing. It shows where educational outreach could occur. I'm going to skip a couple here. We do think while 65% of the participants answer that wildfires are moderate or extremely serious here, Only 70% of the people say they were prepared for a wildfire while they're out in the exact same area that it might occur. That's a little disconcerting. And what's interesting, when we started backing up and okay, what did we get out of this, is that there's a high awareness that wildfires will occur. They're not really sure how severe they'll be, both ecologically and to themselves. But the awareness issue, where this is the entrance where we can get into the education, shows that there's some strong possibilities there. And so we're recommending guys really want to get prescribed burn out there, but some of the results are going to show how we're going to tease this. It's not very common in the country, as Kathleen pointed out, has it on her poster. You got to get over some preconceptions there on it, because it's a country that didn't have fire. We really do suggest that kind of tease out what's the difference between keeping all fires out versus letting some fires in. What are the ecological impacts on that? And we do recommend that the survey instrument, tweaked a little bit, will go to the dunes area along the coast, which is the second most area where they have a fire, because that's also a highly recreated area. So we think there's a possibility for a prescribed burn being in use, but as you talk to anybody like Kathleen, their understanding of ecological impacts of fire in a country that didn't have historically a lot of fires is up in the air. And so we got to get some more data on that. Thank you.